Hello, my name is Danielle Glynn. I am a medical librarian and archivist at the Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle Carlo. I'm the archivist at the Albright-Knox Art Gallery. Welcome to our enclosure demonstration.
We are talking about enclosures today because they are very important for your collections. They are great for preserving individual objects and your entire collection.
And at the end of this video, you will be able to create an enclosure that looks exactly like this.
So if you're going to make some enclosures, there are some supplies that you will need. First, we have some gloves. They're cotton gloves. They are great for protecting your hands if you're working with materials that are a little dirty or have red rot, which Gabrielle will get to in a little bit. Next up, you will want a pencil for measuring everything before you cut. A scoring wheel is also very handy to have after you draw your lines and before you fold. Pair of scissors for cutting, of course, and a straight edge for drawing your lines.
Here are the remaining supplies that you'll need for your enclosures. You will need unbuffered folder stock, which usually comes in a sheet like this. You can order it smaller. Unbuffered is best. When you're in doubt of a certain material, you always want to use unbuffered. It's really used for animal proteins such as leather, silk, and wool. Buffered is used for cotton or other products like that, but when you're in doubt, I would say unbuffered is the best. A high pressure blower, which if you don't have one of these, it's okay. There's another supply that could do really the same thing. If you're dealing with a book that has a lot of dust and debris, you don't want to just wipe it with your hand because you could damage that material. So a high pressure blower is really great. You can just blow the dust and debris off of an item. And I'll use this when we get to our hands-on segment of this video. A bamboo cleaning brush. So in case you don't have a high pressure blower, you can use one of these just to wipe off any dust or debris from your book or item. A bone folder, which Danielle spoke about the scoring wheel, which can do really the same thing. However, a bone folder can give you those really great folds, as you'll see when we make the actual enclosure. A roll of cotton twine, which will be used to tie the enclosure at the end, just so everything stays together. And finally, unbuffered tissue paper. I like to add another layer of protection aside from the enclosure, so I usually wrap the book or the item in tissue paper before putting it in its enclosure. For our first enclosure, we're going to be making an enclosure for this rare book. As you can see, this book is suffering from what is known as red rot. So when leather starts to deteriorate, you can see this reddish sort of powder appear, and it's quite dusty. It can get on other items in your collection, so it's really important to create an enclosure just to prevent that from happening. The difference between preservation and conservation, I just want to mention real quick. So with an enclosure, we are preserving this book, so we're extending the life expectancy of this book. This book in the future does need some conservation, so it needs to be sent to a professional conservator who can actually treat this book and bring it back to the life it once was in the beginning, because it's pretty rough at this point. But we don't have access, or when you don't have access to a conservator, preservation is your best bet. So making these enclosures is really an important skill to have. I just want to show you how the blower and the bamboo brush works. So just the surface of this book, there may be some dust or debris. So just want to, I don't know if you could actually see the dust coming off. I could see it. So instead of me wiping it, which can cause further tears to the cover of this book, I just want to gently, blow it. I usually go into the cover as well. And you can see all that dust kind of blowing. You don't have to go, every page of the book because that would take a long time. But just the parts on the surface and maybe in the cover page. This bamboo brush is another tool you can use. So if you don't have a high pressure blower, you can just dust this debris as well. And as you can see, more dust is coming off of this poor book that we're going to preserve. So I'm going to measure this book now. So this is the first step you take before actually making the enclosure. So we're just going to measure length times width. So this book is about 5.5 and a little bit over 8.5. So I'll just take into account that little bit over there. Okay, so we measured the book length times width. So now I'm just going to measure the actual folder stock. I'm going to do it 3 times. So whatever the measurement was width-wise and length-wise, I'm doing it 3 times because for an enclosure, you want the book to be in the middle and you want 2 flaps in order to enclose it. So we're going to measure 5.5 width-wise. And that way we can have a smaller piece of folder stock so it'll be easier to handle. So I'm just going to measure, and don't worry if you're not the straightest ruler user. You don't have to have the ruler super straight, as long as it's a straight line that you can cut, you're fine. Okay. Sometimes with certain books, the length extends to the whole folder stock, but sometimes you have a little excess, so I'm going to just measure. So we had a little bit over 8.5. Okay, so we can cut some more, and then this folder stock will be a lot easier to work with. Okay, so this is what our folder stock looks like now. It was measured and cut to size, so it's a lot easier to work with. There was a little excess sheet, and we also have a bigger sheet. So you can use this for other things. Maybe we'll have more videos in the future where we can show you how to use your leftover folder stock. And you also have a bigger sheet left like this. So this can definitely be used for another enclosure of a book of the same size or something even a little bigger. Okay, so now we're going to take the book. I've left my gloves on because I know I had to handle the book again, but I will take them off eventually. So instead of having a very scientific method of doing this with equations and all that, when I first learned how to do enclosures, there was a formula and very confusing mathematics involved, but you really can just use your eyes to see how the book or the item is going to fit. So I would just place it right in the middle. It doesn't have to be perfect, but as in the middle as you can get. And then with my pencil, I'm just going to mark off each side, so 4 different sides. Get this dust out of the way here. Okay, I'm going to take my gloves off now because it's easier to deal with this, and then when I handle the book again, I will put them back on. Okay, so I have these 4 markings here where the book was. So I'm just going to measure and mark these. So with the ones on the top and the bottom, you're going to draw a line with. And then with the lines on the side, you're going to measure lengthwise. Okay, so at this point, your enclosure should look like this. So you're going to have 9 different blocks here, and we're going to actually cut the outer blocks, so we're going to cut 4 of them. Okay, so this is what your enclosure should look like at this point. So we cut those 4 outer boxes. So now you can already see what it's going to look like. We have these 2 flaps here and these 2 here. So this is a 4-flap enclosure. this book, since it's a little, thick, some items you're going to have won't need an extra fold for you to, create room for this book. So I'm just going to measure the depth of this book. So it's about 1 inch exactly. So on each of these boxes, I'm just going to measure an extra 1 inch here. So on each of these sides. Okay, so now with these markings, we're going to create folds. So the folds that I'm going to create with this bone folder are going to be your actual folds for this enclosure. So I like to use my ruler just to make sure I'm following the lines here. And use your strength with your bone folder. Put some muscle into it. You want the folds to be apparent. You don't want them to be hard to see. And then with the extra inch that I added, I'm going to create another line here. You can see how much force I'm putting into it because I want my folds to be apparent. Okay, so now we're just going to take the enclosure and fold on those different lines. So you can see now my flap has some room. Okay, so this is what your enclosure should look like now. Don't worry about the pencil markings. That's why I like to use tissue paper to wrap my item, just so it protects it from anything. Okay, so now I'm going to take my book and I want to wrap it in tissue paper just to give it that extra protection. I could probably cut this, and wrap it like you are wrapping a present. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you just want to give it that added layer of protection. Okay, so now we're going to put this book in the enclosure. And there we are. Now, in order to keep everything together, I'm going to cut some of this cotton twine. So I'll just put this aside for now. And just cut enough, however much twine you think you'll need. There are other ways of finishing off your enclosure. Some people like to make a little opening for a flap. I don't recommend doing that because that flap could rip when you're handling the book, and then you're going to need something to tie it with anyway. And there you go. Sometimes I like to have excess so I could kind of wrap it around. But here's your enclosure.
So Gabrielle just showed us how to make a 4-flap enclosure. I'm going to show you how to make a 3-flap enclosure. It's pretty similar, but a little bit different. So let's say you have some AV materials in your collection, like VHS tapes. Many VHS tapes will have a label on the side saying what it is. This one doesn't, but many do. Let's say you want to keep that label visible. So this is when a 3-flap enclosure is going to be right for you. So I will show you how to make that now. So I'm going to use the remainder of the folder stock that Gabrielle used because we've got this nice big piece left over. And I'm not going to be as precise about measuring since I'm working with 3 flaps instead of 4. So I'm going to place this here and kind of eyeball it. You place it up against the edge here because this will be visible here. Okay. And so then I'm going to make my little marks like Gabrielle did on the 3 sides of the tape. I'm going to draw my lines here. I do it a little differently than Gabrielle. I do my measuring kind of here and there. But this is to show you that there are some different ways of doing it, just to make sure everything's the right size, more or less. This is about 7.5 inches. And this here is about 6.5. That's okay. It doesn't have to be the total amount. When Gabrielle does this, it looks a little nicer than when I do it, but that's okay.
No.
And so it's a little over 4 inches wide, so I will make our third flap about 4 inches. Okay. So as you can see, it is a little different than what Gabrielle did. We have these here. So I'm going to cut around this. We have our smaller piece. Thank you. So this is the piece that we're going to be working with for the rest of this. So as Gabrielle did with the book, we want to see how thick the item is so we can make the folds to accommodate that. This is about 1 inch thick. So I'll do that on all 3 sides. I'll make a little mark here. Okay, and then we have to score our lines so we can make our folds. I'm going to use a scoring wheel just so you can see something a little different than the bone folder. Scoring wheels tend to be a bit cheaper than bone folders, depending on where you get them. So this might be a more economical option for you, depending on your budget. And you want to put some force into it. So we have scored our lines, and now you can fold them. And again, if you do also have a bone folder, you can make your folds a little crisper if you'd like to. It's not necessary. I am not going to wrap this in tissue paper. And then you close it up. And so if you have a label on your VHS tape, you would be able to see it. And then you're going to measure your twine and tie it around. Thank you for watching our video today.
Now you know how to make a 4-flap enclosure.
And a 3-flap enclosure. We'll just go over the supplies that we used today. You have your folder stock. Make sure you save all your smaller remnants for projects later on.
We used unbuffered tissue paper. This is also sold in buffered, but I would say go with unbuffered when you're in doubt. This is just for added protection.
I'll add that I did not use tissue paper for the VHS because it's not showing any signs of corrosion. It's pretty stable at the moment, so I left out the tissue paper. But I did use scissors, of course, for cutting our folder stock. You need a pencil for measuring your lines. And you can use a scoring wheel or a bone folder or a combination of both. Again, scoring wheels can be a little more affordable than bone folders. And you'll want your straight edge for measuring your lines and scoring your lines.
And we also used our high pressure blower and our bamboo brush just for cleaning. You won't use these all the time, but if you have some extra dust or debris on an item, instead of wiping it, which can be very damaging, you want to use these tools. Cotton gloves, if you are dealing with a book that's creating flakes or dust, you want to use your gloves. And then finally, cotton twine to tie your enclosure. And I must say, your enclosure is more beautiful.
Yours is the best.
It's really fun to make these enclosures. It's a great skill to have. Stay tuned because there are many more enclosures to share with you.